Think about that. 90% has gone to the incumbents. And then, since 1976, 94% of those incumbents have been reelected. 94% reelection rates over and over and over again. And so you got to ask yourself, why would these 535 people listen to you? Especially when you consider this. You remember on October 3rd, they passed the bailouts. Okay, that's 1 month before the election, and in the middle of October, their approval rate was 9%, first time ever single digits. And then 2 weeks later, less than 1 month after they passed the TARP bailout, and all the outrage that created across the country, 96% reelection rate. But if you voted for TARP, 98% reelection rate. We actually got rid of more incumbents who voted for TARP than not. That's how out of whack Congress has become and not listening to us. And then you have this little interesting statistic. Nancy Pelosi, the Democrat. We have Bob Bennett, John McCain, Eric Cantor, John Boehner, Lindsey Graham, and Mitch McConnell, 6 of the leading Republicans today in our country. 77.9% of all special interest money given to Nancy Pelosi is from the same people who have donated to all 6 of these Republicans. Lindsey Graham, when you take a look at Barack Obama, Harry Reid, Nancy Pelosi, Barney Frank, Chuck Dodd, and Charles Schumer, 82% of his money comes from the same people who are donating to these guys. And if you look at that same group, those 6 Democrats and those 6 Republicans on the other side of the aisle, those 6 scions, what you find is collectively anywhere from 70 to 86% of all the special interest money they get comes from the same people who are donating to those 6 over there. And on the Republican side, it goes everywhere from 82% up to my senator, an embarrassing 92% of his money is coming from the same people who are funding the other side of the aisle. And at that rate, now you can understand, this graph shows the cost of defeating an incumbent since 1974. And it's adjusted for $2,004. So in comparison to what it costs today for a challenger to defeat an incumbent, it almost cost nothing back in 1974 in relative terms compared to when you adjust it for inflation. And as that happens, if you take a look at the influence that special interest has versus us, we the people, if you start back in 1974, you've had those 2 competing interests. As you scroll across that guide or that grid all the way across to the left, you keep seeing our influence being diminished more and more, and the influence of special interest groups keeps getting larger and larger. And it's gotten to the point now where we would argue that big money special interest groups are the de facto 4th branch of government. They are the ones who are writing the 1,100-page bills that nobody's reading in Congress before they pass. They're the ones who are lobbying and paying for your congressmen and then getting all the earmarks airdropped in conference every year when they're doing the budgets. And at that point, I would just ask you, how do you like those apples? And I'd like you to consider this fundamental truth, because now we're going to talk about how did this happen? How has it gotten so screwed up that since 1974, our influence in who gets to be our congressmen and senators has been so diminished? And we would propose that the fundamental reason big money has taken over our political system is because Congress has radically altered the purpose of our nation's tax and budgeting policies. The way we take money in and the way we take and spend money has been taken over by those special interest groups because Congress has changed the purpose of those functions. See, the original equation, when it was first set up, is we started with the halls of Congress. Congress was supposed to decide how to raise money and how to spend money. And so in that original equation, tax revenue went into Congress, government services came out. It's a very simple equation. And it's an equation that we could probably all get behind. There's certain government services we all need. Things like protection, court justice systems, maybe protecting the borders if they wanted to do something really crazy like that. But you have these government services that come out, and that was our original purpose of the entire system. We're going to raise money, we're going to pay for government services, but since then Congress has radically altered that equation. That equation's been radically altered because now the new equation, it's put this radical twist in that it's now a method, it's an ever-expanding method of rewarding their special interest campaign donors. Okay? And now, instead of just benefits coming out, now instead of government services coming out, now what's coming out are benefits. And those benefits fall under 3 headings, because there's only 3 things your congressman can give a special interest donor. The first is they can redistribute tax money. They can get the maximum amount of money out of the Treasury and into their pockets. That's one way. The second way would be exemption from paying taxes. And right now, we are adding over 700 pages a year in new tax legislation. Now that's the size of Harry Potter 4. And we've been doing this on average since 1913, an average of 700 new pages every year. Every one of those pages is a special exemption so that this group doesn't have to pay the taxes that this group does. Okay, that's what all that legislation is for. And the third thing they can do is get the exemption from the rule of law. They can write laws that will give one group preferential treatment over another. And in so doing, give them an advantage over their competition and basically fund their business in exchange for campaign donations. Every earmark that you see is a way of rewarding the special interest donors. Every 1,100-page bill is one earmark after another. And this is our definition of an earmark: taking specific number of dollars, giving them to a specific private entity without a competitive bid process, only because a congressman or senator says so. And if you look at the 1,100-page bills when they pass them, where they don't read them, and after a few weeks you start hearing and seeing all the information coming out about what was in that bill, every one of those is a special earmark. It's a special benefit to a special interest donor. Alexis de Tocqueville, back in the 1800s, when he was writing about democracy, had this great quote. It says, "The American Republic will endure until Congress discovers that it can bribe the American people with their own money." And ladies and gentlemen, I'm here to tell you we've reached that day. We are at the point where we are bribing the American people with our own money. And that brings us to fundamental truth number 2. As a direct result of altering the nation's tax and budget policies, the general public, you and I, will never have enough money to compete with big money special interest groups. And as I'm going to show you right now, that's because once they prime the pump, they use your tax dollars to fund this system against us. Because watch how this works. Whenever you've got an ever-expanding method of rewarding special interest campaign donors, you're going to have an ever-expanding pool of lobbyists whose only job it is to secure those 3 benefits. And right now, there's 35,000 registered lobbyists in Washington, D.C. for your 535 senators and congressmen. Okay? And every one of those 35,000 lobbyists has more incentive, they have more time, and they have a lot more money to go after that and to make sure that they bend the will of Congress to their will instead of the people's will. And watch how this works. Here's how they use your money against you. Initially, this is how this equation works. The lobbyists will put money in as campaign donations to Congress. And when those lobbyist donations go in, Congress basically becomes for sale. They hand out benefits. And then what happens is they never have to use their own money. Because, for example, when the National Council of La Raza and their supporters donated $180,000 to Barbara Boxer in 2006, Barbara Boxer got them a $5 million earmark. So they now have, for community outreach services.